It's always been fascinating to me how much we anticipate Christmas. From about Thanksgiving on, right? We anticipate it in every way imaginable. We decorate our homes and our churches and our offices and sometimes even our cars. We go out and we spend money on gifts. We send cards. We go to programs and parties and all kinds of events that surround the holiday, and we even make the Advent season about lighting candles in anticipation of it, speaking about the event itself. We anticipate Christmas. We look forward to it. For those of us who are getting older, we no longer anticipate it anymore. We just watch it fly by. But isn't it interesting that there is little anticipation when it comes to Easter? Any longer. I think there was a time when there was more anticipation of it, but I don't see that so much anymore. In fact, I would say it's barely noticeable on the calendar. We don't decorate. I turned the lights purple. That's about as far as we got with the decorations. Some will go to a Maundy Thursday or Good Friday communion service. We might buy a chocolate bunny and bite its ears off. And as Baptists, we have a tendency to shun the Lenten season because we think it's too Catholic. And on top of that, unfortunately, there are many that call themselves churches that anticipate Easter in some really rather bizarre ways. So, isn't it interesting the dichotomy between these two holidays? Now, I would say that probably the reason for that difference of anticipation, at least from a societal perspective, is that it's acceptable to us as a secularized or pagan society to celebrate a birthday. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable, right? Nobody has a problem with that. Most are willing to embrace Christmas, if you think about it, because really nothing spiritual is expected of them. It's a birthday of some historical figure. They call him Jesus. We don't really know who he is, but hey, I might as well get in on the revelry, right? But the celebration of Easter demands something on a spiritual level, by definition, doesn't it? A birthday is a normal thing. A man walking out of a tomb alive is not. It's not a normal thing. Someone rising from the dead is not something ordinary. So I want to talk with you a little bit this morning about the anticipation of Easter. And I want to put this thesis before you this morning. The resurrection of Jesus is, in fact, a highly anticipated event. It's highly anticipated within human history, as revealed by God, in the foreshadowings of the one who was himself raised from the dead, establishing him as Lord, and in the church, amongst the people who themselves are anticipating a resurrection. First, by experiencing his. Or let me rephrase that a little differently. While the world is not filled with anticipation regarding the resurrection, we should be. This moment in time is the hub around which all of history turns, and our place in Christ is found. This event is the hub around which all of human history turns, and it is the central hub of our place in Christ. So, along the lines of this idea of anticipation, I want to approach it in three parts. First, I want to do a peek into the question, was the resurrection anticipated in the Old Testament? Had God revealed this historical reality to his people prior to the coming of Christ? Was there a sense of anticipation in the world, at least from God's perspective, of the resurrection? Secondly, I'd like to examine the anticipation of Jesus in regard to his own resurrection. What did it mean for him, Jesus, to predict his own rising from the dead. This will be my key point this morning. And then finally, I want to make an application of this to us. How does the resurrection of Jesus become our anticipation, both in this life and in the life to come? So, with Christ's anticipation at the center, let's bookend it by Old Testament and New Testament anticipation of those who are his saints. See it? Christ at the center, Old Testament saints, New Testament saints, and let's spin around how Jesus saw this. So let's start first with the anticipation of the resurrection in the Old Testament. And I will suggest to you that indeed the Old Testament does, in fact, anticipate the resurrection of the Christ. I want to take you to Acts chapter 13 to see it. Now, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, of course, but I want to start in verse 28. And we're picking up in the middle of a speech that's being given by the Apostle Paul. In verse 28, he says these words, Acts 13:28, "And though they found in him," that is in Jesus, "no guilt worthy of death, they asked Pilate to have him executed. And when they had carried out all that was written of him, they took him down from the tree and laid him in a tomb. But God raised him from the dead. And for many days he appeared to those who had come up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are now his witnesses to the people. And we bring you the good news, that what God promised to the fathers, this he has fulfilled to us, their children, by raising Jesus. As also it is written in the second psalm, 'You are my son, today I have begotten you.' And as for the fact that he raised him from the dead, no more to return to corruption, he has spoken this way, 'I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David.' Therefore he says also in another psalm, 'You will not let your Holy One see corruption.' For David, after he had served the purpose of God in his own generation, fell asleep and was laid with his fathers and saw corruption. But he whom God raised up did not see corruption. Let it be known to you, therefore, brothers, that through this man forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you, and by him everyone who believes is freed from everything from which you could not be freed by the law of Moses." This particular speech of the apostle occurs early in his public ministry on his first missionary journey. Barnabas and Saul are sent from Antioch in Syria. They go through Cyprus and then land in southern Asia Minor at a place called Pamphylia. They traveled then northward inland to the place we call Galatia, to a city called Antioch of Pisidia. So they go from one Antioch to another, often confusing to people. There, at the synagogue on the Sabbath, they're asked to speak. You see that at the beginning of chapter 13. And Paul gives a brief Israelite history lesson, culminating in the arrival of Jesus as the fulfillment of that history. So 14b through 25 is all of that. Then Paul makes his point. So now after giving this brief Israelite history, he comes and makes his point. And the point is this: the resurrection of Jesus from the dead is the central message of the gospel, a resurrection that was foretold to them, and now proves that it is only through Jesus that forgiveness of sins can come. Or more specifically, only through the resurrection of Jesus that forgiveness of sins can come. And here's what Paul does to make this proof. He takes out his Bible, which in his day, of course, would have included only the books that we call the Old Testament. There was no New Testament written at this point, very little. There might have been a gospel written at this point, but there was nothing of the apostles written. So he takes from his Old Testament, from his Bible, 3 different passages to demonstrate that Israelite history actually anticipated the resurrection of the Christ. The people should recognize it now. They've heard about it. Now they should go back and say, aha, that's what that was speaking of. In verse 33, Paul quotes first from Psalm 2:7. "You are my son, today I have begotten you," to demonstrate the resurrection, validating the nature of Jesus as the Son of God. Paul asserts that that verse is saying there's the proof that God, the Father, has accepted Jesus as the Son. Or more specifically, we would probably say it as we read Colossians 1, that he was the Son of God, and this shows this to us. Then he quotes in verse 34, he quotes from Isaiah 55:3, when he says, I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David. He connects Jesus to the blessings of David. The messianic principle of the Christ coming from the line of David and fulfilling his covenant. It was understood in Israelite history that the anointed one, would come from the line of David. And so by Paul making this quote here from Isaiah 55, he is saying this one is fulfilling the covenant of David. But then he quotes from Psalm 16:10 in verse 35. You will not let your Holy One see corruption. And what he does is he points out the messianic expectation of the Holy One not seeing corruption. That word means decay. It means bodily decay once placed in the ground, is what that means, as in the final results of death and burial. So he puts together these three verses to make what he then concludes in verse 36 and following. He connects the promise of Psalm 16:10 to Jesus, given that David did die and did see corruption of his body, arguing backwards that Jesus is the one begotten of the Father. In other words, Paul argues that the Old Testament anticipated the resurrection of the Christ in the various prophecies made about him, which surround David, but could not be applied to David. Because his body went to the ground, his body saw corruption. The Apostle Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and Luke writing this down in this book, is making this assertion. He is saying, Paul's saying, listen, your Old Testament tells you that Jesus was supposed to rise from the dead. Do you now see it? Do you now understand what we're running around telling you about? We're telling you about one that rose, because we know now that that is the means by which forgiveness of sins now comes. It's the central message of who he was as the Christ. The Apostle Paul gives to us an exegesis of his Bible to say, listen, the Old Testament speaks of this resurrection. Do you not see it? Now, we know, of course, that when we look at the Old Testament, it's only in shadows that the resurrection of Jesus was made known. It's not directly stated. Paul has to link together some verses to get to it. I mean, we see it now, right? You look at it and you go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Nonetheless, Paul is saying that this was anticipated in the plan of God. God's revelation of the resurrection in the history of Israel demonstrates that he, the Lord, anticipated it as part of his decree to save a people by his Son coming into the world, living, dying, and rising. My point is this, simple. God anticipated a resurrection because that's what he purposed. And he gave us pictures of it in the Old Testament. They were hard to see. And I imagine in the days of Isaiah and the days of David, they were virtually impossible to understand. But now, they should be quite clear that the Father had purposed to send his Son into the world, not only to take on human flesh and to live amongst us as a man, but to go to death and then rise from the dead as the final statement of who that Christ is. You want to know who satisfies the covenant of David? It's the one who walked out of a tomb on a Sunday morning. That's the one. And the Father anticipated that. You might say that for about 4,000 to 6,000 years of human history, God was anticipating the resurrection of his Son. He was waiting for that day to come. But Jesus also anticipated his own resurrection, even as I read to you from Matthew's Gospel. Now, I'm not going to reread it all. I've read the chapter, so I'm only going to be paraphrasing a few key verses, specifically around verse 21. Specifically around verse 21. But I want to show you something from the whole chapter. Now, you could come to chapter 21 and you could give a very simple statement of how Jesus, or what the anticipation of the resurrection was for Jesus. And the simplest sense would be that he anticipated that he would be persecuted, that he would die, that he would be buried, and that he would rise again. Okay, so when he tells his disciples that he's going to be, in verse 21, when he starts to tell them then from that time on that he's going to suffer under the elders and the chief priests and be killed and on the third day be raised, he's anticipating that, in the sense prophetically foretelling that that's going to happen to him. In other words, he knew it to be his destiny, and he told others about it. Okay, that's the simplest sense of that. The simplest sense. Jesus understood that his death and resurrection were essential to the completion of his Father's plan of redemption, foretold from the dawn of time, as we already pointed out. All of this was necessary to redemption. So Jesus could certainly be simply saying, you know what, guys? God said, my Father said that I must die and rise again, and so that's what's going to happen to me. So he's simply announcing it. Okay, that's the simplest sense of this sort of anticipation, what it meant to him, right? And we could just leave it there. No, we can't just leave it there. Because I would suggest to you that verses 21 to 23 in the center of Matthew 16 are the axle around which the entire chapter turns. There's much more that Jesus anticipates here. Much, much more. You knew you wouldn't get out of here that easy, did you? I'm calling it a more grander understanding of what Jesus was announcing, what he was anticipating. So let me put it like this. Jesus anticipated for his disciples he would be persecuted, die, be buried, and rise again, as part of a larger reality that would come forth from those events. In the simplest sense, Jesus says, okay, I understand that for me, I'm going to die, be buried, rise again. In the grander sense, he's saying, you need to understand that I'm going to die, be buried, and rise again, because it's going to impact you. It's going to have something to do with you. Okay? And there's a thread. There's a thread that runs to verse 16. And if you were listening carefully, you might have heard it. The thread goes like this. The thread is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, with his resurrection as the genesis of that discipleship. In this chapter, Jesus is connecting what it means to be a disciple, one of his followers, to the event of him walking out of a tomb. Now, let me show you. Let me show you. The chapter can be divided into obvious sections. In verses 1 to 12, Jesus warns his disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? And you remember, as the story goes, he's not talking about bread. He's not talking about yeast. He's talking about the teachings of the Pharisees. And he's talking to his disciples to be aware of those unable to provide true righteousness in their teachings. They cannot provide true righteousness because they don't know who he is. They don't know who he is. Now, you'll see that in a second. They're concerned only about themselves, you see. They're concerned only about themselves. They blindly grope for signs. Show us a sign that we might know that you are the Christ, even though the Messiah is standing right there before them. Even though he's fed thousands with a few loaves and fishes. He mentions that, doesn't he? But they're blind. They can't see it. They're groping in the darkness for some sort of sign, even though the Messiah is standing right there in front of them. Their teachings are permeated like leaven. Their teachings are permeated with ignorance. Their teachings are permeated, leavened with ignorance. They walk around telling you what they think is true, but they haven't got a clue. They don't know. More specifically, they don't know who he is. They don't know who he is. Now, how do I know that's what they're thinking? Look at verses 13 to 17. He turns to his disciples and says, "Who do men say that I am?" Now, most of us would kind of disconnect the two paragraphs and say, well, they're not really related. Oh, yes, they are. Matthew put these together on purpose. Now, I believe that this is happening chronologically, and Matthew writes it chronologically. You'll see why in a minute. But Jesus comes to them now and says, after they've had their encounter with the Pharisees and the Sadducees asking for a sign, he turns to his disciples and says, who do those men say that I am? And of course I don't know, some say you're Elijah, some say you're a prophet. We don't really know. They don't really know who you are. Right! All right, so who do you say that I am? You who have spent all this time with me, you who have seen the signs that I have done, who do you say? In contrast to these fools, which, by the way, encompasses the whole human race, who have you, my disciples, come to believe that I am? And of course, Peter, our impetuous friend, blurts out this great confession. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's the great confession of belief. Made possible, you remember, as the text tells us, that the only reason that Peter can say it is because the Father has made it known to him. It is not ordinary for people to call Jesus the Christ, the Son of the living God. Only those to whom God has revealed, only those to whom the Father has revealed it can know this to be true. It's the hallmark of confession central to being a disciple of Christ. It's the hallmark confession of what it means to be a disciple of Christ. I am a disciple of you who are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Is it not true that that's what we must confess in order to know him as Savior? Must we confess that? Does not Paul say it simpler when he says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's a confession of true understanding coming from only those to whom it is divinely revealed, contra those whose teachings are full of ignorance. They don't know. And then in verses 18 to 20, Jesus then connects this great confession to the establishment of the church. Are you beginning to see the thread here? His body, Paul interprets, right? Colossians 1. His body, the living organism, made up of all who make this profession. Who belongs to the church? Those who trot down to the local congregation and dip themselves in water, are they the ones who make up his body? No. It's those who make this confession. Those who are able to say, like Peter, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. It's an organic gathering from the whole world of those who know who Jesus is. Right? You cannot be ignorant about Jesus and be his disciple. Although I think there's many who would claim the name of Christ who are utterly ignorant of who he is. But from a biblical perspective, you cannot be ignorant of Christ. He connects this great confession to the establishment of the church, or all of those who will be his disciples and belong to him. Now look at verse 21 to 23. And don't miss the first few words of verse 21. Remember I said a minute ago, I think this is written chronologically. I think this is events that occur chronologically that Matthew records in this chronological order to make a point. From that time. What time? From Peter making that confession, from Jesus saying, I'm going to build my church upon this confession. From that time forward, then, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. It's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus, speaking about this organism called the body, suddenly is the impetus for him to now talk about what's going to happen to his body. Now, as I said a little while ago, the simplest definition of what Jesus is doing here is he's simply anticipating the things that are going to happen to him. He's simply announcing, listen, guys, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and die and be buried and be raised. Don't worry about it. No. What's he doing? He's announcing these things to his disciples because it's going to mean something to them, not just to him. This isn't just a neutral, passive announcement. This is words of power coming forth. Jesus anticipates these things: his persecution, his death, his burial, implied, and his resurrection. He anticipates these things as the foundation under the establishment of all true believers in the world. You want to know what the basis of the church is? This thing that I've called my body. It's me being killed, being buried, and being raised. That's the foundation of this thing called the church. This statement clarifies who is a part of the church. This statement clarifies who's a part of his body. Certainly those who confess Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. But how are they able to do so? How are they able to do so? What is revealed to them, or better, I could say it, what is revealed in them that causes them to understand who Jesus truly is and can confess it? It's not just an announcement of his destiny. It's not just an announcement of his destiny, but an anticipation of what will come from his death and resurrection. It's an announcement of what will come as a result of his death and resurrection. It'll be a people who know him because they are a part of him. It's not just a neutral announcement of, well, I'm going off to Jerusalem to suffer and so forth. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to you, but no. This is Jesus looking to his disciples and says, listen, I want you to understand something. I'm about to go to Jerusalem and suffer. I'm about to be arrested and tried. I'm about to be beaten. I'm about to be nailed to a cross. I'm about to die. And I'm going to be buried. And I'm going to be raised. And all of that is about you. I want you to understand where you belong in this. Now, I think the Spirit of the living God has a wonderful sense of humor. I don't mean to be disrespectful in saying that. I think there are some things that are just simply so obvious that they're laughable, if you will. Does Peter get this at all? No. I think it's recorded, Peter's response, because he doesn't get any of that I just told you. Because he takes Jesus aside and he begins to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. It's fascinating to me, interesting, isn't it, that he ignores the resurrection part of that. Right? He ignores the resurrection part of that. I mean, if we were there at the moment and we kind of understood a little bit about what's going to happen, Jesus is going to be raised, we'd be going, hey, Peter, whoa, brother, he said he's going to be raised. Let's talk about that. Okay. I understand that you don't want him to die, but what is this raised thing? See it? I think it's the obvious ignorance of that which is what helps cement the thread in this passage. It helps us to see the fact that, yes, Jesus is trying to say something to them that they don't get. But when will they get it? When he rises. And more explicitly, of course, when he meets with them and teaches them and then sends the Spirit. He doesn't get it. In fact, Jesus even considers him an agent of Satan at this point. Get behind me, Satan. Now, again, I'm not convinced that Satan was in some way inhabiting Peter. I think he was influencing Peter strongly towards this. But you know what the devil's trying to do here, right? Divert him from his mission. Divert him from his mission. And so he becomes an agent, Peter that is, becomes an agent of the devil to try to dissuade Christ from this direction. Or, as I've said a number of times, even as we were talking on Wednesday nights, the devil often try to offer alternative paths. Jesus, you don't need to go to a cross. There's a better way. There's an easier way, simpler way. And I would have you to note, by the way, that if you read Acts chapter 2 carefully, Peter's first great sermon, he preaches exactly the opposite of what he says in these words. He preaches exactly the opposite of it. Even going so far as to saying, listen, what happened to Jesus was preordained by God himself. And we should have known it. But now go to verse 24 to 28. Again, I'd have you to notice the chronology here, okay? Again, I'm convinced that Matthew is writing this chronologically, or better, it happened chronologically, and Matthew's writing it in that chronological sense. Notice the first word of verse 24, then. Okay, so then, as a result of that, Jesus then comes to his disciples and talks to them about what it means to be a disciple. Now, you see the thread now? You see it? What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? The Pharisees cannot be disciples because they're ignorant. But Jesus is making it clear what it means to be one of his own. And what he says to them is, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, meaning deny his own passions, etc., and take up his cross and follow me. Specifically, they must go where he is going. They must go where he is going. They too must pass through death. Look, there's no other possible symbolism to the word cross. Everybody listening to Jesus would have understood exactly what he's talking about. When he talks about a cross, everybody knew what a cross was. Crucifixion by this time in Roman history was well known, was well understood. A cross is an instrument of execution. People die on that thing. When they nail you to a cross, there is no expectation of you continuing on with your life. If you're carrying your cross out to Golgotha, you're not thinking about what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow. You're not worried about how your IRA investments are going to be doing tomorrow when the stock market goes down. You're not going to be worrying about that. Those kinds of concerns are going to be irrelevant. Or, as one great philosopher once said, death narrows the focus. You're going to be thinking about one thing, and one thing only, and that's death. What does that mean? When Jesus says, take up your cross, he obviously is not meaning for them to carry an actual physical instrument of death, although some of them would. But he's clearly talking metaphorically here that they too must pass through death, meaning they need to leave behind the things of this world. A true disciple of Jesus is one who is willing to sacrifice, and I'm using that word purposely, sacrifice their own agendas, their own plans and priorities, their own passions, their own desires, their own hopes and dreams, yes, their own sins, in order to follow him. In order to follow him. Jesus says, I'm going to a cross to be crucified and to die and to be raised. And if you want to follow me and be my disciple, guess what you got to do? You got to be willing to sacrifice like I am. But let me ask you a question. Where does the cross lead? Where does it lead? Now, our initial and immediate reflexive answer to that question is, it leads to death. Yeah, it does. I just spent 5 minutes telling you that, didn't I? It leads to death. But based on what Jesus just said, doesn't it actually lead to a resurrection? I'm going to Jerusalem to die. They're going to arrest me and beat me and kill me and put me in a grave. But I'm going to rise from the dead. So when Jesus says to his disciples, you need to take up your cross, he certainly means that we need to take up the sacrifice of our lives. But to what end? Just to live like the most woeful people on the planet? To go around with this I'm dead attitude? No. We go to a resurrection. Now, I will say this. I think the chronological order that these are put in strongly suggests that Jesus is anticipating his own death and resurrection as the pathway that all of his own must follow. Death from this life and all its ways, and second, to life through being joined to him in his resurrection. To being true disciples and a part of his church. Being a part of his body. Being included in that organic thing where he is calling from every tribe and tongue and nation the people that belong to him. How is he calling them? First, he's calling them to die to this world. That's the first call. You want to come be my disciple? Okay. Here's the deal. You must follow me on the road to Golgotha. It's no longer about your life. It's no longer about your plans, your priorities, your passions, none of those things. All of that is dead. You want to follow me? Fine. But be willing to give up everything for me. I mean, that's how serious the cross is, isn't it? But here's the promise. I will raise you up, just as I will be raised up. You want to be my disciple? Take up a cross. Put aside this life. Come to me, and I will raise you up. Jesus anticipates his resurrection as the beginning of the church, the foundation under his disciples, the reality that they will both understand and experience such that they are able to confess that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. See how they all go together? Those who go through the cross, those who are willing to sacrifice to come to me, and I raise, they're going to be the ones that are going to be able to stand before the world and say, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And they will be included in the church. In other words, Jesus isn't just announcing his destiny. He's anticipating, there's my word, he's anticipating what will come as a result of dying and rising in all of those who will be included in it. I'm going to Jerusalem to die and be buried and to rise. Oh, and so are you. Metaphorically, none of you are going to go to Golgotha with me, literally. But we're all going to go with him metaphorically. We're all going to go with him. We're all going to die with him. He's going to die for us as our substitute. He's going to give himself for us, and we're going to die with him, and then he's going to come forth from a tomb, and so are we, who belong to the church, who can make this great confession, whose teachings are actually filled with knowledge and understanding rather than ignorance. Because we know. What do we know? We know life from the resurrection. So let me take you to the application of this to us. And I want us to go to, of all places, the book of Colossians. Now, in this case, I'm going to skip ahead to a passage I will probably be preaching on sometime in 2027. Chapter 3. Chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Now, I had actually thought about using chapter 2, 6 and beyond, because the subject is raised over there as well. But I think 3, 1, and 2, or 3, I should say, or 4, 3, 1 to 4, actually says it more succinctly, okay? And here's what the Apostle Paul says. If then you have been raised with Christ, see it? He's writing to a church. Who's he writing to? He's writing to people who have been raised from the dead. He's writing to a people who have come to know this Christ and they have been raised with him. If you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on the things that are on the earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Notice Paul uses that word above a couple of different times. That which is higher than this world. Things of a spiritual and divine nature. The exalted place of Christ is above, isn't it? That's what he says. Set your mind where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. And when someone is seated at the right hand of God, what does that imply about them? It implies that they possess all the authority of God himself, the authority over all things. Now, we already know that from earlier in this book, don't we? When we've been spending scads of time in chapter 1. Paul was convinced absolutely that Christ was the authority ruling over all the kingdom that he inaugurated upon his world by his death. He had come from the Father, he had lived, he had died, he had been raised, and now he is, to coin a word, preeminent over all things. He is seated in the place of preeminence. By the way, if I might just, as an aside, this will drive some of you crazy, I know. And please, don't come to me at the end of the sermon and want to talk about this particular thing, all right? Because you'll miss the whole point of the sermon. But I'm convinced that when Jesus speaks in Matthew 16:28 about some of you will not see death until the kingdom comes, I think what he's talking about is the resurrection of Jesus as the inauguration of his kingdom, which started when he walked out of that tomb on a Sunday morning. Some of you will still be alive. Oh, one of you will not. Which one was that? Judas. Some of you will still be alive. The exalted place of Christ, his lordship over all, his authority is the one now ruling over the kingdom that he has inaugurated upon the earth. His preeminence. Set your mind on those things. Set your mind on the things above. The disciple is now being made alive in Jesus and a part of his kingdom to set his mind and his heart upon those things established by Christ. Dare I say, beyond this world. Why? Because we have died to this world. It no longer holds any fascination for us. We're dead to it. And according to verse 4, the believer will, when Christ appears, join him in glory. As we live and serve our risen head, we anticipate, therefore, the day of our glory. And what day is that? The day of resurrection. There's coming a day when all who confess that Christ is the Lord will be raised to glorious immortality. The glory of Christ himself in the resurrection. There is a resurrection awaiting us, and we will be fully glorified, such that the full extent of God's intention for the elect will be fulfilled in us in both body and soul. I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to that day. And the older I get, the more I'm anticipating it. A severe case of tennis elbow has convinced me I need a new body. This one ain't working anymore. But why do we anticipate that? Because he died, he was buried, he rose. Thus we died, we were buried, we rose. Now, while we certainly anticipate a day of resurrection, right? We're looking forward to that day. Our confidence in its certainty is due to our having already been raised from the dead. You see? My confidence in the day of the resurrection is not based on just some ethereal, theoretical idea that there's going to be a resurrection someday. No, no, no. The confidence that we have is in knowing that we have already been raised. Now you say, yeah, but you just told me about your tennis elbow, preacher. And I'm not talking about this body being raised. I'm talking about our souls being raised. Where that deadness that we had has been changed to new life. And what is the most fundamental thing about that new life in us? We now understand things we would never have understood before. We would never have been able to cry, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," unless we had been raised from the dead. My certainty in being raised someday to a fully glorified state is based entirely on the fact that I've already experienced a resurrection. I'm already alive. And I can read this revelation, and I can see these things that Paul writes here and say, I understand what you're talking about. Set your minds on things above. Think about these things. Because you can. Because you can. And because of this new life given to me, I'm able to do the following. Number one, I'm able to confess with my mouth and with my life that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, before the whole world. The first act, I believe, of this great resurrection is a confession like that coming forth from our lips. The first act of a person who's been raised from the dead by the Spirit of the living God, whose heart and mind has been changed. We call it regeneration, conversion. The first thing, He is Lord. He is risen from the dead, and He is Lord. Every knee shall bow, including mine. Every tongue confess, especially mine, that He is Lord, to the glory of God. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. Secondly, because of this new life that's been given to me, I am able to take up a cross every day and put aside my own desires, my own goals, and my sins in this world to follow Him. Now the desire of my living heart is to obey Him, because He has raised me from the dead. Or to say it much more simply, there ain't no going back. Okay? There's no going back. I know what I was. I know what I was. Or what I could have been. But there's no going back to that. Now it's serve Him, love Him. I've been raised to new life. And so I am able to put aside my goals and embrace His, you see. And then thirdly, because of this new life given to me, I'm able to join Christ's body to serve my risen head as He accomplishes His work throughout the world. Now I can be a part of a family of people who've been raised from the dead. You know what we all have in common as followers of Christ? We're all alive. Okay? We may wear different clothes, have different hairstyles, and be shorter or taller than each other, but guess what? We have one thing in common, and that is we're all alive in Christ. And we are drawn together by the Spirit of God into this organic unity called the church to serve our risen head. Who? The preeminent one. The one that Paul says, you remember back in chapter 1. The head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. We belong to Him, therefore we are able to gather together as a people and serve Him. There's great anticipation in the resurrection, isn't there? The Old Testament anticipated it. Yeah, I know. It was kind of in types and shadows, and it takes a bit of exegesis to see it, as the apostle did. But nonetheless, it's there. God had purposed it and promised it. So when the Lord Jesus comes and He begins to speak about it, He's not just telling His disciple what's going to happen to Him. He's telling His disciples what's going to happen to them, as they are included in what He is doing. The culmination of His life, His death, His burial, and His resurrection is that He's going to call a people out of the world, make them alive, include them in Himself, and draw them together to be the instrument of His preeminence in all the earth. We must anticipate this thing. We anticipate a day of resurrection, but let me tell you, my friends, we're also anticipating, in very much a reverse sense, what it is that has already happened to us. This isn't a day just to celebrate the fact that a man walked out of a tomb on a Sunday. It's that. But we are also here to celebrate the fact that we too walked out of that tomb with Him on that Sunday morning. We've been included in His body. We are His disciples, and we are able to say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And upon that rock, the church is built to the glory of Christ.